welcome into week 14 of the NFL season and the Consistently Cashin podcast. I'm Colby Conway. Find me over on X at Colby R. Conway. And I am back this week with Ron Rigney, essentially taking a week off from the podcast, try to get our minds right and start a little clutch game streak here to end the season. But Ron, like you mentioned before we jumped on, it is bye-mageddon. We got 6 teams on bye. We got numerous teams in primetime games. We still have a 10-game main slate, if I am looking at that correctly, which I am, but there are some sparse games, many games in the low 40s. There's only even one in the upper 40s, and then we do have one that's approaching 50 in the game of the week. But how are you, and what are your general thoughts on the slate if I didn't hit on any of your already opinions about it?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, man. And I don't have a whole lot other to point out. Just the fact that you've even got one of the Lions has it in the high 30s, but you've got that one Buffalo Los Angeles game around 50, and then other than that, there's not a lot. So we'll see what we can do here. But again, we'll figure out what we can do. I think we're still going to find some consistency, even though we only have 10 games.
I think we will indeed. So let's take a look at the quarterback position. Obviously, Josh Allen in that highest scoring game of the slate is the top priced quarterback. You got Jalen Hurts up there going against Carolina and a couple of other guys down there. So when it comes to the quarterback position, who are a couple of guys that you've been looking at or targeting?
I mean, if you've seen Josh Allen play, it's hard to not want Josh Allen in your lineup. The dude is putting the team on his back and carrying them to the playoffs. But again, that $8,000 makes it a little tough to swallow. I think you can make a great argument for Jalen Hurts as well. The only thing that worries me there is if they get up a little bit and they just start handing to Saquon the whole time, they may be able to hand to Saquon from the very beginning and just have that be the offense. The one that I liked, I went a little bit cheaper. I like Baker against Vegas. I like the price point there. Again, Sam Darnold was kind of intriguing a little bit further down. There's not a lot of cheap options that I really felt good about, but I feel like with what Baker's been able to do without Chris Godwin, Mike Evans is back. He's got Kate Otten, but at $6,400, I think he was my favorite in the build that I was able to do.
Yep, Raiders have allowed the 7th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks, so I certainly don't mind that one. If you want to get ballsy, I actually don't mind Will Levis this week, going up against Jacksonville because of how generous they have been, allowing the most over the last 4 weeks. Or if everybody's going to go to Baker, maybe you could look and go for Aiden O'Connell. He's super cheap. Tampa Bay's also allowed a lot of fantasy points per game, so I think you could look there. Or I think you're absolutely right. Sam Darnold's also very intriguing because Atlanta's also been rather generous to the quarterback position for the season. And I'm sorry, all those numbers I said were for the season as a whole, not the last 4 weeks. But regardless, Vegas and Tampa Bay both still, and Atlanta and Jacksonville, all very generous over the last 4 weeks as well. If you're going to pay up, I think based on how you're saying, I think we're in agreement. If you're paying up, it would be Josh Allen over Jalen Hurts. Okay. So we're in agreement there. If you had to go basement shopping, I like Will Levis. I also think Derek Carr is interesting at 5,100 just because New Orleans, that secondary is not very good and they've been picked apart in recent weeks. So I like Derek Carr as well. That could be another one there. Anything else to opine about the quarterback position, or are we heading over to running back?
Real quick, I know you don't like it, but again, I'm always intrigued by Mac Jones against Tennessee. I know he's not great. He was a little bit better out the last time. He did get a clutch game out the last time. And just looking a little long term, I know we're looking just this week, but decent schedule for Mac Jones here on the way out of the season as well. So throw that out there. Probably won't go that route, but I think you can make an okay argument if you want to save some serious cash and go that route.
And Tennessee's allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks over the last 4 weeks. So I actually, I don't like them, but I don't mind that at all when it comes to some lineups this week. At the running back position, obviously it's Saquon Barkley and then everybody else. Carolina, you've run on them all year. Fantasy points per game, they've been a little bit better over the last 4 weeks, but for the year as the whole, 6th most fantasy points that's quarterback. Most points per game this season, fantasy points per game to running backs this season for the Panthers. Over the last 4 weeks, they come in at the 7th spot. And for the year, most yards allowed on the ground to running backs, most touchdowns on the ground allowed to running backs. Actually, receiving yards, they actually have been a relatively, like maybe league average in that regard too. So if you have the money, I think it's a no-brainer that you go to Saquon. I just think it makes sense. They're 2-touchdown favorites. Vegas says they're going to be playing with the lead, and Philly's about as run-heavy as it gets just in general. But when they have the lead, even more so. But running back, what stands out to you? And I'm also going to kind of hit you with a probing question as well. Do we have to eat the chalk with Mr. Garendo in San Fran?
I think it's tough not to at that price point. And when you look up what the Bears have done against running backs, they're right there at the bottom as far as fantasy points allowed as well. I mean, I know that we've got that offense, but it's not like Brock Purdy is a gunslinger throwing it down the field. So I think that they look to get Garendo involved early and often. I think you kind of have to against what Chicago's allowing you to have there. Again, at $5,400, I worked out. I didn't look to him initially. Wanted to see kind of what I had left over, and it ended up working out that he worked in as my RB2. I went with my RB1. I went up to Tony Pollard again. Jacksonville is not good at most aspects of football. They are right there near the bottom as far as allowing fantasy points to running backs, and they are number one over the last 5 weeks. Tony Pollard is getting the ball about 15, 20 times a game. He's clearly a big part of that offense. And again, you got Will Levis there. And I know you mentioned him, but they're going to have to rely on that run game a little bit to get Will Levis going. And Tony Pollard has looked solid over the course of the season as well. But again, I think at $6,400 with the workload that he gets and the defense he's facing, I think he's kind of a chalky one as well there at $6,400. But I'm okay with that because I think I like the price and I like the matchup a lot.
Yep. And if you think Tennessee can play with the lead, they are going to be heavily utilizing Pollard. I know they haven't really had much time leading by a lot this season, but they, when leading by 7+ of like what feels like 8 snaps that they've led for more than 7+, they do run the ball over half the time. So that could lean itself beneficial there to Tony Pollard. So I really like Tony Pollard a lot. So I'm glad you mentioned him. If you're paying up, it's obviously Saquon. I love Bijan Robinson more so for player props than DFS this week. I think Kyron's in a really good spot.
That was another guy I want to mention for sure.
You can get to Buffalo on the ground. It might not look like it per se when you look at like fantasy points per game to running backs. They're technically like near the bottom. They're some of the better ones, but you can get at them in the middle of the defense. Everything they funnel is towards the middle there, and they are just willing to give Kyron the ball. So I think Kyron's interesting. I think James Cook is interesting. The other chalk with Breece Hall being doubtful is probably going to be Braylon Allen. Jets, you can run on them a little bit too. So I don't think you'll need to do a double chalk of like Allen and Garendo as your running backs. I think it's more so kind of picking one or the other. But if there's like wide receivers that you really like and want to pay up for, or you just want to get Barkley, you could always go those two as some cost saving options there. Other ones, I like Tyrone Tracy a good bit at 5,800 because New Orleans isn't very good either against the run. And I mean, over the last 4 weeks, San Fran has allowed the most fantasy points per game to running backs. I know that's ballooned because of James Cook last week, but DeAndre Swift missed some practice time this week. I just don't know how I feel about that. And then the other one, I guess I should mention, is Alvin Kamara. The Giants are banged up and have allowed the second most fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks. So maybe Alvin Kamara could be mixed in there as well. Wide receiver, I wrote about this over at Fantasy Alarm. I'm not touching A.J. Brown this week. As the highest priced receiver, I don't think there's going to be enough meat on the bone there going up against Carolina as 2 touchdown favorites. So I basically taken A.J. Brown off my draft board. What wide receivers have kind of caught your eyes? You've done some lineup building here.
I went a little bit further down. Again, not a lot at the top there that I feel all that comfortable paying up for. I mean, Justin Jefferson, you can make a solid case for him, but again, that $7,800 price tag makes that a little bit tougher to argue. I'd like Calvin Ridley a lot more if it was Trevor Lawrence and not Mac Jones. I mentioned Mac Jones, but again, I don't know what that looks like as far as volume for Calvin Ridley. Where I ended up settling was kind of in that 6,500 to 5,500 range. I ended up going with the threesome of Drake London against Atlanta, Khalil Shakir against the Rams, because I want to get a little bit of exposure to that game, but it's kind of hard to kind of figure out where exactly you feel good about it. And then I went Devontae Smith. Again, I got a little bit scared of everything you said with A.J. Brown, but I feel like this is the first week I've seen him in a long time without an injury designation. And again, Carolina is not great on defense. They're going to have to get a lead somehow. Again, Devontae Smith's kind of a sneaky, cheaper play there, I think, for that $5,500 or $5,900 or $5,800 price point. So that's kind of where I settled. But again, I think there's a few guys that you can make a pretty good argument for outside of them.
I'm glad you said Drake London. He's way too cheap on
Hmm.
DraftKings coming off a game with 16 targets and just his role in the offense in a Kirk Cousins revenge game narrative. Jacoby Myers is a no-brainer for me at 5,600. Sounds like the ankle is not really an issue, and obviously you can throw on Tampa Bay, so
Hmm.
that bodes well for Jacoby Myers. And then the other one I like, I'm a sucker for George Pickens this week. I know it says
Yeah.
he's questionable. I really wouldn't be all too worried about it. He destroys man coverage. That's all that they want to play. I've had a lot of success in lineups that I've liked where I've actually done hero RB, paying for two studs over there, and you can probably guess who the two are, and then settling into like Drake London, Jacoby Myers, and like Khalil Shakir or Amari Cooper. Because I'm just like you, I want a Buffalo receiver. It's just a matter of which one I get. If you're going cheaper than all of those guys, I like Jordan Addison. Atlanta's allowed the
Hmm.
third most fantasy points per game to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. He's an interesting switch off of Justin Jefferson. Amari Cooper is a guy that I like as well because obviously I just mentioned him. Nick Westbrook-Akine won't stop scoring touchdowns, but he just on his like when you look even at these games, like yeah, he scored, but three catches,
Not
two, 3. He's
not
better
much
suited for
else.
FanDuel. He's better suited
Yeah.
for FanDuel where the touchdowns are really big. And then Marquez Valdez scaling. Giants cannot defend the deep ball. Derek Carr is willing to throw the deep ball, especially against the coverage scheme that they deploy. So I am definitely in on Valdez Scantling as well down there. Let's head over to tight end. Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, the big three there. Then it drops down a little bit. Lineups that I've had, I have not had the luxury to get one of those elite guys at the tight end spot. So that's kind of where I've kind of settled in at. But there is one tight end that's caught my eye. We tend to agree on this guy more often than not. So I'm seeing if we can do it again here this week. But what tight ends caught your eye?
I'd love to be able, like you said, to afford Brock Bowers. Wasn't able to do it though. I settled on Cade Otton just because I
The
want
one.
somebody that Baker Mayfield
That's
is
the one.
throwing to. Mike Evans is a little bit too expensive for me. Cade Otton has come on since the injury with Chris Godwin. Again, we talk about him quite a bit, but Vegas. I think in all the years that I have done fantasy football, Vegas has always been at the bottom. Them and the Cardinals have always been at the very bottom of fantasy points allowed to tight end. And lo and behold, look where the Raiders are again this time. So it just makes sense to me that and when you watch them, they're incorporating him in more. You see them throwing screens to him. So again, I want me some Cade Otton. He was the guy that was a no-brainer. I didn't even look anywhere else.
Cade Otton is way too cheap, and you were exactly right. The Raiders against tight ends, fourth most for the year in terms of fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks, also fourth most. So Cade Otton and Drake London are two of the absolute better values this week on DraftKings. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Let's hit defense quick, and then let's move on. You got Eagles, Bucks, Steelers up there. What defenses have you really been looking at for this week?
It was tough because I didn't have a ton to work with as far as salary wise, but in the price point that I was at, I was kind of looking at the Saints a little bit. I ended up settling with the Niners just because I know that they've gotten a little better offensively since they fired their coordinator. I don't know really what to expect since they got rid of Matt Eberflus, but again, it's that Niners defense. I know they haven't been the Niners defense that we're used to, but at $3,100 against a rookie quarterback with DeAndre Swift a little bit iffy, I felt pretty good about that. Maybe they can force a couple of turnovers. I'm not looking for Chicago to, they're making that West Coast trip as well. Not really looking for that to be too successful either. But again, price point, matchup, thought that was the best for what I had money available for.
Yep. Let's see where our money goes up, and we'll figure out where we end up from there. So, usually we each get one person that we get to lock in. However, we both pretty unanimously agreed on London and Otten. So let's add those guys in, and then we'll each do that. We get
Okay.
our one because otherwise we're both just going to use it on that anyway and end up with the same exact scenario. So let's lock in Drake London. Let's lock in Kate Otten, and now we each get our one person. That basically this week we get a bonus one. I got London, you got Otten, we now get another one. So one guy we get to lock in, no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
We talked about running back. We talked about Pollard and Garendo. We didn't go over flex because we kind of do that at the end. Tyrone Tracy is who I have in my flex. You mentioned him. So I want to use mine with Tyrone Tracy. I think that's a solid matchup against New Orleans. And I think they're going to have to lean on him with the situation they've got at quarterback.
Yep. And I'm going to go to Jacoby Myers because I want him. So we'll get some action there. So I do think we need to get something from that Buffalo game. It's going to come down to whether we pay up at quarterback for Josh Allen or if we maybe, use like a Kamara or a Barkley or something along those lines. So you mentioned Shakir. I mentioned Amari Cooper. Where do you want to go with that? I'm kind of good either way. Shakir's a little bit more expensive, but I think we're going to have money. So I don't think it's a problem.
As I'm looking at what we can possibly do here, I'm looking at having a little fun this week. So, are we able, do you think, to go with Josh Allen and Saquon Barkley? Do you think we could pull that off based on what we have locked in and actually feel good about it?
Average remaining would be 3,600. We'd have to go relatively cheap
Yeah, it's going
at
to be ugly, but
defense. Let's leave defense off the board. So we have 10-8 right now. So we probably would then have to go. Cooper would take us down to about 5,739. What is Braylon Allen? Braylon Allen, so he's $5,000 going up against Miami. If we put him in, that'd be 2,900 a player. Ooh, that one's gonna get a little dicey. What about Allen and Kamara?
okay.
And then we go. Let's try Cooper. We have 6,700 for a flex and a defense, assuming that it's, let's just do an average of $3,000 for the defense. That'd be 3,700 for a flex. That's more than my Valdez Scantling. We got Tyler Boyd. He's not really. Oof, that's gonna we might not be able to do.
Probably not going to be able to do it, but it was worth looking at.
So what if? Well, I mean, what about Mayfield? You mentioned him.
Yeah.
Mayfield, Tracy. I'll take out Kamara for now because we might be able to get up to Barkley. London, Myers, Cooper, Otten. I'm good with all of those. If we then go, who would your chalk running back be between Garendo and Braylon Allen?
I don't know. I mean,
I think Rodgers.
I don't know. I'd say I feel a little more comfortable with Garendo, but I think you can make a good argument for both.
So if we put Garendo in 10-9, flex would be 54. If we go Shakir, 5,000 for a defense. That's a little bit more. So we could actually go. So we could actually take Garendo from 54 to like James Conner. We get him up to Pollard.
Okay.
So we go Pollard. We still have 4,000 for a defense, so we'll have a couple $100 that we're able to move around, or we just kind of take a top defense and swallow the rest. Or we take Cooper up to Shakir. Whoops. Oh, I already have Shakir in there. All right, let me move him into the wide receiver spot. Wide receiver, Shakir. All right, so now we got 9-1 for a flex and a defense. Say we need $3,000 for a defense. We'd have 6,100 for a flex. If I could control this stupid thing. McBride, Harrison. There's your Devonta Smith. Jerry Jeudy. DK Metcalf. We get in that Seattle, Arizona game. Oh, or we even go up. I mean, we can even go up a little bit more. To how far could we get? I'd love to get to George Pickens. If we get to Pickens, that's 23 for a flex or defense. That's a little much. Let's come down a little bit more. Do you have a strong lean between Njigba or Metcalf?
I mean, at this point, I think I might say Njigba just because he's been healthy. Metcalf's coming off, being nicked up.
And then 2,800 for a flex. We could get the Titans defense against Mac Jones. Jets or we go the other side, Jacksonville against Will Levis. Or, well, actually, you mentioned Devonta Smith. What if we go Devonta Smith at 58? That gets us 33 to the defense. And then we go to, you want to go Niners against the Bears? I mean, they're all banged up, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I went originally. So.
Okay. Yeah, then we have $200 left over, but that would give us Baker Mayfield, Tyrone Tracy, Tony Pollard, Drake London, Jacoby Myers, Khalil Shakir, Cade Otton, Devonta Smith, and the 49ers defense. I don't mind it.
Solid.
Cool. Let's lock it in. That'll be the Week 14 consistently Cashin lineup. Ron, let everyone know where they can find you and what you got going on here at BigGuyFantasySports.com.
Yeah, man, doing a little something different the last couple of weeks. I know you got the Bimageddon coming up. I hit on that a couple of weeks ago, so hopefully you read the article from 3 weeks ago and got ready for that ahead of time. Again, we're in that playoff run. You know what you need to do. You know who you need to get. So I've been analyzing, just been looking at some of those late round guys and some of those undrafted guys that have outperformed themselves their ADP as far as consistency. So I did running backs this last week, did quarterbacks last week, the week before. So go check those out. Of course, Colby's got his stuff on there. We've got the who's hot, who's not. We've got the analysis I'm doing. We've got, of course, all the consistency. We've got the prop bets. We've got the DFS lineup that we just gave you. We're going to get back on the Cashin train this week. I just know it. So go over to BigGuyFantasySports.com. Check out everything that we have. Get those lineups set. Get ready for those playoffs. And good luck to everybody.
Couldn't agree more. And you can find me over on X at Colby R. Conway. And we will see you in week 15 with the next edition of the Consistently Cashin podcast.